Hey guys, what's up? It's Charlie here, and today we're going to be looking at 10 crazy ideas that actually worked. We all have crazy ideas from time to time, but these usually end up with somebody getting injured, embarrassed, or worse. But here are some times when insane ideas actually worked out pretty well. Before we begin, be sure to subscribe and hit that bell, and comment done for a shout out at the end of our next video. Coming in at number 10, we have supercomputer. We've all heard of, but probably never seen a supercomputer. They're massive, super powerful computers which can do things your MacBook couldn't even comprehend. The only downside to them is the cost. Supercomputers are super expensive. If you thought that $2,000 MacBook was pricey, supercomputers are in the millions of dollars. One day, the US Air Force decided they needed a supercomputer. I don't know what happened to their budget, maybe it was spent all on hats. But for whatever reason, they didn't have enough money in their budget to buy a supercomputer. They thought they wouldn't be able to do it, and therefore wouldn't be able to do important Air Force stuff they needed to do. But after a second look at the old bank account, they realized there was one thing they could afford, and that was 1,716 Sony PlayStation 3s. And that was exactly what they bought. They purchased them and hooked all 1,716 of them together. This resulted in something called a Condor cluster. This is basically where loads of small computers combine to make one mega machine. You might think that sounds silly, but it really works and looks pretty incredible. It cost 1/10 of a regular supercomputer, and now universities can use it too to experiment with AI and theories of relativity. Next up is catching some sun. Who doesn't love sitting in the sun and topping up their tan? When you think of nice places to do this, the Italian Alps might spring to mind. But if you ever want to get a tan or even see the sun in Italy, then don't come to the town of Viganella. The town is located in the Italian Alps. Sure, the landscape's beautiful, but it creates one problem. That is that it casts a giant shadow all over the town. This means for at least 84 days a year, Viganella is totally in shadow. So to solve this problem, they came up with one insane idea. They built a giant mirror to try and catch the sun and reflect it onto the town. It sounds like something from a movie, but they actually did this. And before you mock them too much, you should know that it actually worked. The mirror is operated by a computer that follows the sun's movement. That way, the sun is always reflecting into the center of town, allowing everyone to be in the light. This really proves there's some genius in every insane person. Next up is silly string. When you think of military equipment, jets, tanks, and ARs come to mind. But one thing the Iraqi army uses is silly string. It's usually seen being sprayed around by some annoying kid at a birthday party. I know the Iraqi army doesn't exactly have the same funding as the US, but it can't be that bad, right? Well, no, this is actually quite a genius idea, albeit crazy. There are tripwires all over the place in the places where the Iraqi army track enemies. These tripwires are connected to explosives and are super hard to see, and people never spot them until it's too late. So to get around this, they spray silly string into the air before entering a new area. This won't set off any tripwires as the silly string is so light, but what it will do is show the tripwire's location, so the soldiers can avoid going anywhere near it. The US Army discovered this when they intercepted 120,000 cans of the stuff being sent to Iraq. They probably laughed about it, but think about how many lives silly string has saved in the Iraqi army. Next up is handy. Zoos are often criticized for how they treat their animals. But this zoo in China really takes the cake. Somehow, 2 of their dolphins had found some plastic and had eaten it. It wasn't looking good for the dolphins, so they called the vets, but there was nothing the vets could do. The plastic was trapped inside their throat and wouldn't come out. And in case you didn't know, dolphins' throats go down around 3 feet, so it would be way too hard to get it out. And none of the vet's tools were flexible or long enough to get down there. That was when one crazy guy had somewhat of a genius brainwave. The zoo decided to call the world's tallest man. Why? Well, because he also had the world's longest arms. His arms were long enough and flexible enough to reach down the dolphin's throats and remove the plastic. The man's name was Bo Shang, and his arms are nearly 3.5 feet long. I bet he knew they'd come in handy someday. Next up is I See You. Ganges Delta is a village out in Bangladesh. It's known for fishing, amazing wilderness, and animals. The only downside to all those animals are the tigers. More specifically, the Bengal tigers. Bengal tigers were sneaking up on groups of villagers fishing and tearing them to pieces. At one point, over 60 villages were being destroyed by the tigers each year. And seeing as they're a small community to begin with, that's a lot of people. These incidents mainly occurred out by fishing waters and in jungles where people's backs are turned and they're concentrating on something else. So one day, somebody must have thought enough is enough and came up with a really insane plan. The villagers all began to wear face masks on the back of their heads. We've all heard the expression eyes on the back of your head, but for these guys, it's no joke. Believe it or not, these actually worked, as the Bengal tigers were put off by the masks. Just by looking at the creepy faces printed on these things, I can see why. Next up is bulls. We all know that water in LA is scarce, which is why if anything put water in danger and was to say make it undrinkable, then action must be taken. In 2008, the Ivanhoe Reservoir was turning toxic. More specifically, its water was becoming carcinogenic. This is where sunlight combines with chlorine and bromide to make bromate in the water. So they needed to find some way of sunlight stopping touching the water in the reservoir. Well, instead of getting a giant mirror like in Italy, the LA Department of Water had another equally as crazy idea. They decided to dump 400,000 plastic black balls into the water. This would cover up the water, meaning that sunlight couldn't get to it. It sounds like an insane stunt from a YouTube video, but believe it or not, it actually worked. The water stayed safe to drink, and the bulls were to thank for it, as they blocked out all sunlight. I just feel sorry for the guy who's got to go collect all those balls. Next up is old school. Say what you will about Putin and Russia, but they have some of the latest and greatest technology. This isn't only in their military, but also in their government. One thing Russia is known for is its hacking. For example, there was a lot of speculation that Russia hacked the US election computers. While Russia's doing all this hacking and leaking millions of documents, you probably assume the USA and other countries are doing it right back. Well, you'd be surprised to hear that they're not, because they can't. Does this mean Russia uses such advanced tech that even the USA can't hack into it? No, quite the opposite actually. The Kremlin, which is the Russian government, actually don't use any computers. They do things the old-fashioned way, and there's a good reason why. Instead of using computers, they all use typewriters. That is because they can't be hacked, unlike computers. And it really works, as Russia hasn't been hacked in decades. Not only that, the typewriters only cost $15,000 once when Putin's leadership began, while the US and UK spend millions every year on their government's computers. Looks like sometimes the old ways are the best ways. Next up, we have snowplow. This is another crazy Russian idea that actually works. You may not know much about Russia as a country, but one thing everybody knows is how cold it can get and how much snow can pile up there. In most locations, this isn't a big issue, but one place snow can really mess up is airports. Russia has a massive problem with snow on its runways.
It's a huge problem.
It's such a problem that a regular snowplow isn't enough. But you know what can clear snow? A jet engine. So they thought, why not combine the two? That's right, in Russia they strap MiG military jet engines onto regular snowplows to clear snow just like that. Boston in America has recently borrowed this idea for its train tracks because it works so well. They say they do some crazy stuff in Russia, and while that may be true, hey, it works. And it also looks awesome seeing this operation be carried out. Next up, we have motorbike jump. We've all seen bike stunts, whether they're done by professionals or whether they're done online by amateurs. Either way, they're not usually too hard to accomplish if you've done the planning and have the skill. But one Australian surfer and dirt bike rider named Robbie Madison had an insane idea to break a world record for the longest motorcycle jump. A ramp was created and many people assumed it wouldn't work, but Robbie proved them all wrong. He jumped more than 20 meters in the air and cleared 105.5 meters. But that was just the warm-up. In the real thing, he cleared a massive 107.29 meters. So many people thought this wouldn't work, as it went against known laws of physics. But Robbie is one of the best dirt bike riders of all time, which is probably why he's now worth over $10 million. I'm not sure about Kim Kardashian and people like that, but this guy definitely deserves his money. Next up is cola risk. If you go into a restaurant and ask for a Coca-Cola, you likely hear this line, "Is Pepsi okay?" The answer is usually, yes. But how come it's never, "Is Coca-Cola okay?" Well, it's simply because Coca-Cola is a far more popular brand than Pepsi. But why is this when they have a pretty much identical product? Well, the story's actually pretty fascinating, as it's a crazy idea that worked out perfectly. After the financial crisis of the 1930s, both companies had little money left. Pepsi decided to save the money they had, but Coca-Cola decided to do something more radical. They decided to spend almost all of their money on marketing so that everybody knew about their product and would buy it. While Pepsi played it safe, Coca-Cola was risky, and we can see that paid off. This crazy idea could have cost Coca-Cola their company, but instead it made them one of the biggest in the world. And now you can't be more than 1 mile away from the Coca-Cola logo anywhere in the world. Check out the poll in the top right corner and you can vote for the craziest idea that actually worked. I think it's the huge mirror because that sounds like something out of a cartoon. This video shoutout goes to Spartan GTA Multigamer. Subscribe and turn on notifications for a shoutout at the end of our next video. Well, as always, thanks for watching. Check out some more videos on screen right now. Leave a like if you enjoyed, and if you haven't already, what are you waiting for? Subscribe.